Welcome to Life Stories, where we share extraordinary journeys of resilience, love, and courage. Today, we delve into the story of Emma and Grace Parker, twin sisters whose lives took a shocking turn after a simple school project uncovered secrets buried for over a decade. What began as a quest to explore their family heritage led them into a world of hidden experiments, a mother's sacrifice, and a fight for justice that would inspire millions. Stay with us as we unravel their emotional and powerful journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's story. The morning light poured through the windows of the Parker family's small kitchen, bathing the room in a soft golden glow. The sunlight caught on the faded wooden cabinets and the well-worn tiles on the floor, making the space feel cozy despite its modest appearance. Laura Parker stood at the stove, carefully stirring a pot of oatmeal. Her uniform, neatly pressed despite its age, was ready for her shift at the local diner. Her face, framed by soft brown curls, was marked with faint lines of worry, though her eyes still shone with warmth as she glanced at her daughters. At the table sat Emma and Grace Parker, 16-year-old twins who were identical in appearance but strikingly different in personality. Emma, with her loose curls spilling over her shoulders, was hunched over a sketchpad, pencil flying across the page as she captured the delicate interplay of light and shadow on the fruit bowl centerpiece. Grace, her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail, was engrossed in her textbook, her fingers tapping quietly on the table as she memorized facts for her upcoming biology quiz. "Girls, breakfast is ready," Laura called softly, breaking the serene quiet of the morning. She carried 2 bowls of oatmeal to the table, sprinkling brown sugar on top, just the way her daughters had loved since they were little. "One more detail," Emma murmured, leaning closer to her sketchpad, her tongue poking out in concentration. Grace looked up, her lips curling into a knowing smile. "You always say that, Em. And then it's another detail. And another. Until we're late." Laura chuckled softly, placing the bowls in front of them. "Books and drawings away now," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "You'll have plenty of time later." Emma closed her sketchpad with a sigh, sneaking in one last flourish before picking up her spoon. The 3 of them ate in comfortable silence, the sound of clinking spoons and the occasional chirp of a bird outside filling the room. It was a simple routine, one that Laura cherished. Yet, behind her loving gaze, there was a tension she couldn't quite hide, a heaviness she had carried alone for 16 years. Later, as they walked to school, the twins fell into step beside each other, their matching backpacks swinging in opposite directions. The crisp morning air hinted at the arrival of spring, carrying the earthy scent of thawing ground. "Oh, look," Emma exclaimed suddenly, pointing across the street. Her eyes lit up as she noticed the vibrant colors of a new mural painted on the side of a building. "They've added to the mural. It's even better now." Grace glanced over, shaking her head with a mix of amusement and exasperation. "Trust you to notice every little artistic detail," she said. "Meanwhile, I'm reviewing chemical equations in my head." Emma linked her arm through her sister's, grinning. "That's because you're a walking calculator, Gracie. And I'm the free spirit. More like a scattered spirit," Grace teased, laughing. "Someone has to keep us organized." Their playful banter carried them all the way to Madison High School, where they joined the throng of students heading to class. Their shared homeroom teacher, Ms. Robinson, greeted them with her usual enthusiasm. She was a young teacher with a kind smile and a knack for making even the most mundane lessons interesting. "Class, I have an exciting announcement," Ms. Robinson began, her voice carrying easily to the back of the room. "This semester, we're starting a special project called the Heritage Discovery Assignment." Emma straightened in her seat, her creative mind already spinning with possibilities. Beside her, Grace tilted her head thoughtfully, her analytical nature dissecting the scope of such an assignment. "You'll have the opportunity to explore your family roots," Ms. Robinson continued, writing the project title on the whiteboard. This can include DNA testing, family interviews, or historical research. The goal is to create a presentation about what makes your family unique. A buzz of excitement filled the classroom. Emma's hand shot up immediately, questions bubbling to her lips. Grace watched her sister with a mix of amusement and growing curiosity, though a faint unease settled in her stomach at the mention of DNA testing. That afternoon, the twins burst through the front door of their modest home, their excitement palpable. Laura, already home from her shift, was in the kitchen slicing apples. "Mom, you won't believe what we're doing for school," Emma exclaimed, her voice brimming with enthusiasm. Grace set her backpack down on the counter and joined her sister. "It's called the Heritage Discovery Assignment," she explained. "We're supposed to research our family background. We thought about doing one of those DNA ancestry tests." Laura's hands stilled mid-slice, and the knife clattered softly against the cutting board. For a moment, her face was unreadable, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of something, fear, perhaps, or worry. "Oh," she said finally, her voice carefully composed. "I'm not sure that's necessary. Your Aunt Sarah knows so much about our family's history. She'd love to help. We've been saving up," Grace said, her tone practical. "If we split the cost, it's totally doable. It'll make our project stand out," Emma added, bouncing on her toes. Laura's movements were deliberate as she set down the knife and wiped her hands on her apron. "There are other ways to make your project special," she said, her voice tinged with something the girls couldn't quite place. "DNA tests can be expensive. And, well, they're not always as simple as they seem." Grace frowned, her sharp mind picking up on her mother's hesitation. "Mom, is something wrong? You seem worried." Laura forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I just want you girls to be thoughtful about how you spend your money. That's all." But later that evening, as the twins pored over websites for DNA testing companies, they couldn't shake the feeling that Laura was hiding something, a secret too heavy for words. That night, in the quiet of their shared bedroom, Emma and Grace sat side by side at their small wooden desk, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the laptop screen. Grace's fingers danced across the keyboard as she researched DNA testing companies, her expression focused and precise. "This one has the best reviews," Grace said, pointing at the screen. "They're known for their accuracy and even test for health markers." Emma leaned closer, her curls brushing against her sister's shoulder. "Look, they're having a sale," she exclaimed, her voice laced with excitement. "It's like it was meant to be." Their laughter was soft but filled with the warmth of shared enthusiasm. The DNA test kits felt like the start of something exciting, an adventure that would lead them deeper into their family's story. But in the back of Grace's mind, a small knot of doubt lingered, a faint echo of their mother's hesitation. As they continued discussing the logistics, a creak in the hallway made them pause. They turned to see Laura standing in the doorway, her face calm but her hands tightly clasped in front of her. She had always been their quiet, steady anchor. But tonight, something was different. There was a tension in her stance, a shadow in her eyes. "Found a good company?" Laura asked, her voice steady but strained. Emma beamed. "Yeah. It's called Heritage Link. They're really well known, and the results include all kinds of cool details." "That's wonderful. Girls," Laura said, forcing a smile, "just let me know when the kits arrive." "Okay." Her tone was even. But as she turned and disappeared down the hallway, both twins noticed the way her shoulders slumped, as if under an invisible weight. They exchanged a glance, unspoken questions passing between them. "What do you think's bothering her?" Emma asked softly, her pencil tapping against the desk. Grace shrugged but didn't look away from the screen. "I don't know," she admitted. "But something's definitely up." The next few days passed in a blur of schoolwork and anticipation. Each afternoon, Emma and Grace rushed home to check the mailbox. their excitement growing with every passing day. Finally, on a sunny Wednesday, the small brown package arrived. Emma spotted it first, letting out an excited squeal that echoed down the block. "They're here," she shouted, clutching the package to her chest as Grace joined her on the front porch. Inside the house, Laura stood in the kitchen, her hand trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the counter. She watched her daughters from the doorway, their laughter ringing through the room as they carefully unpacked the kits. Her heart ached at the sight of their joy, knowing what lay beneath the surface of their curiosity. The twins laid the kits out on the kitchen table, marveling at the sleek design and detailed instructions. "It's like a science experiment," Emma said, her artistic imagination lighting up at the sight of the sterile collection tubes and cotton swabs. Grace, ever the planner, studied the instructions with meticulous focus. "We have to avoid eating or drinking for 30 minutes before swabbing," she said. "And we need to be super careful not to contaminate the samples." From the hallway, Laura watched them silently, her knuckles white against the doorframe. The sight of the swabs and vials sent a shiver down her spine. She wanted to rush in, to sweep the kits off the table, to stop the process before it began. But instead, she remained frozen, the weight of her secret holding her in place. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma and Grace sat in their room, the DNA kits in front of them. The soft hum of their favorite playlist filled the air as they prepared to collect their samples. "What do you think we'll find out?" Emma asked, twirling a swab between her fingers. "Maybe we're descended from royalty. Can you imagine? Princess Emma Parker." Grace snorted. "More like court jester," she teased, though her smile softened the words. "I just hope it's interesting." When the timer went off, they worked in silence, their movements careful and precise. The swabs collected their DNA, the tubes were sealed, and the vials were safely packed into the return envelopes. From her room, Laura listened to the muffled sound of her daughters' voices, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She felt tears prick her eyes as the weight of the past bore down on her. She had worked so hard to protect them, to build a life free of the shadows she had escaped. And now, with every step her daughters took toward the truth, she felt those shadows creeping back in. Later that night, as the house grew quiet, Laura crept into the living room. She sat alone on the couch, an old photograph in her trembling hands. The image was faded and creased, showing a younger version of herself in a sterile laboratory, surrounded by people in white coats. On the back, scrawled in hurried handwriting, were the words, "They must never know." Staring at the photo, Laura whispered to the empty room, "Please, don't let this destroy everything." A week passed slowly, each day dragging like a heavy burden as Emma and Grace waited for their DNA results. Every afternoon, they rushed home from school, their backpacks bouncing as they raced to check their laptops. The anticipation was almost unbearable for Emma, whose artistic imagination painted vivid scenarios of what they might discover. Grace, though outwardly calm, was equally consumed by curiosity, though her analytical mind focused more on the logistics than the fantasies. "Still nothing," Grace would say, closing her laptop with practiced patience. She would turn back to her homework, but her furrowed brow betrayed her unease. Emma, on the other hand, was far less composed, refreshing her email every few minutes until Grace finally took her phone away. "You're driving me nuts," Grace said, exasperated. "They said 7 to 10 business days. It's only been 6. In the kitchen, Laura moved through her daily routines like a ghost, her mind clouded with worry. She jumped at every ping from the girls' devices, her heart racing as she feared the moment the results would arrive. The weight of her secret pressed down on her, leaving her sleepless and fraught with anxiety. She prayed the truth would stay buried. But deep down, she knew that time was running out. On the 8th day, as golden sunlight poured through the living room windows, Emma's laptop chimed with an incoming email. She froze, her eyes widening as she read the subject line, "Your results are ready." "Grace," Emma called out, her voice cracking with excitement. "They are here. The results are here." Grace abandoned her textbook, her measured steps betraying her own excitement as she joined Emma on the couch. They sat shoulder to shoulder, their breathing synchronized as Emma clicked the link. 2 separate reports appeared on the screen, one for each sister. "Let's look at them together," Emma suggested, her cursor hovering over the first report. Grace nodded, and they opened their results side by side. Emma's report loaded first, revealing exactly what they had expected, a mix of West African and European ancestry, tied to the family history they already knew. She scrolled through the breakdown, fascinated by the percentages and regional specifics. "This is so cool," Emma exclaimed, pointing at the map on her screen. "Look. It even shows where our ancestors came from." Grace smiled but remained focused on her own report as it finished loading. Her smile quickly faded, replaced by a look of disbelief. Her hands began to tremble as she stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "Grace," Emma asked, noticing her sister's stillness. "What is it?" Grace turned the laptop toward Emma, her voice barely above a whisper. This has to be a mistake." Emma's eyes darted across the screen. Unlike her own report, Grace's showed predominantly South Asian ancestry, with no trace of the West African heritage they had grown up identifying with. But what truly made their hearts stop was the red warning box at the top of the report: "Important genetic anomaly detected. Medical attention recommended." "This doesn't make sense," Grace murmured, her voice shaking. "We're twins. How can we have different ancestries?" Emma grabbed her sister's hand, squeezing it tightly as fear and confusion washed over her. "Mom," she called out, her voice sharp and urgent. "Mom, you need to see this." Laura appeared in the doorway, her face already pale as if she had been expecting this moment. When the twins turned their laptops toward her, showing the drastically different results, she pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes filled with panic. "Delete it," Laura said, her voice trembling. "Delete the email right now." "Mom, what's going on?" Grace demanded, standing up. "Why are our results so different? And what's this warning about a genetic anomaly?" "Please," Laura begged, backing away from her daughters. "Just delete it. You don't understand. Then help us understand," Emma pleaded, tears brimming in her eyes. But Laura didn't answer. Instead, she turned and fled down the hallway, the sound of her bedroom door slamming echoing through the house. The twins stood in the living room, their world suddenly tilted on its axis. Questions and fears swirled around them like a storm. But there were no answers. Only the uneasy quiet that settled over the house as night crept in. By midnight, Laura hadn't emerged from her room. Dinner sat untouched outside her door, the plates cold and forgotten. Emma lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with fragments of thoughts she couldn't piece together. Across the room, Grace sat at the desk, the glow of the laptop screen casting soft shadows on her face as she pored over her results again, searching for some clue to make sense of it all. Finally, Emma sat up, unable to bear the silence any longer. "We need to figure this out," she said, her voice firm despite the quiver in it. "If Mom won't tell us, we'll find out ourselves." Grace turned to face her, her analytical mind already churning with possibilities. "We'll start with the testing company," she said. "There's got to be more information they can give us." The sisters leaned closer to the screen, united by a shared determination. Whatever secret their mother was hiding, they were going to uncover it together. The next morning, Emma and Grace were already at their laptop, composing a carefully worded email to Heritage Link. Grace took the lead, her logical mind crafting a message that balanced curiosity with urgency. "Regarding the genetic anomaly flagged in my results," Grace typed, her brow furrowed in concentration. Could you provide more specific information? We would like to understand its significance and any recommendations for follow-up. Emma, seated next to her, nodded approvingly. It's perfect, she said. Not too pushy but clear enough to make them take us seriously. The email was sent. And then the waiting began again. The twins filled the hours with school assignments and distracted conversations. Their minds never far from the mystery surrounding their DNA. Laura's door remained closed. The silence from her room heavy with unspoken tension. By mid-afternoon, the twins received a response. Grace's heart raced as she opened the email. Her sister leaning over her shoulder to read the reply. Urgent. We strongly recommend immediate consultation with a qualified physician regarding the genetic marker identified in your results. Due to medical confidentiality regulations, we cannot provide additional details. Please seek medical attention as soon as possible. Emma's eyes widened. That doesn't sound good, she whispered, her artistic imagination conjuring up all manner of alarming scenarios. Grace's mind was more measured but no less concerned. They're saying it's serious, she murmured. We need to see Dr. Peterson. He knows our family history. Do you think Mom will let us go? Emma asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Grace shook her head. We're 16. We can make our own appointment. Mom doesn't have to know. The decision made. Grace picked up the phone and called Dr. Peterson's office. Her voice calm and professional as she explained their need for a consultation. By the end of the call, they had an appointment scheduled for the next afternoon. The following day, the twins walked to Dr. Peterson's office, their usual chatter replaced by a heavy silence. Emma clutched her backpack tightly, the printed DNA results tucked inside, while Grace kept her focus straight ahead, her mind replaying every detail of the email they had received. The reception area smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. Mrs. Chen, the elderly receptionist, brightened at the sight of them. The Parker twins, she said warmly. Dr. Peterson just had a cancellation. Perfect timing. Minutes later, the twins sat in the examination room, the hum of medical equipment filling the space. Dr. Peterson entered, his face creasing into a warm smile. He had been their doctor since they were babies, and his presence had always been reassuring. What brings you in today? He asked, settling onto a rolling stool. And where's your mother? Grace took charge, explaining their school project, the DNA test results, and the flagged anomaly. As she spoke, Emma pulled out the printouts and handed them over. Dr. Peterson's smile faltered as he read the documents, his professional demeanor slipping for just a moment. I see, he said quietly, his tone more serious. And your mother doesn't know you're here? The twins shook their heads in unison. We wanted to figure this out first, Grace said, her voice steady. Dr. Peterson set the papers aside and folded his hands. I'd like to run some blood tests to verify these findings, he said. Would that be all right? The twins nodded, their trust in him unwavering. The blood draw was quick and routine, and the samples were sent to the lab with an urgent note attached. Dr. Peterson asked them to wait in his office while he followed up. Hours passed. Emma sketched in her notebook, her pencil moving absently over the paper, while Grace flipped through medical magazines, her analytical mind scanning for anything that might provide insight. The occasional footsteps outside the door made them jump, their nerves stretched thin. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, a lab technician delivered an envelope. Dr. Peterson opened it, his face growing pale as he read the results. Without a word, he stepped out of the office, leaving the door slightly ajar. The twins exchanged worried glances before creeping closer to listen. Dr. Peterson's voice, tense and frightened, drifted through the gap. Yes, I understand the protocols. No, I'm certain the markers match exactly. Yes, they're both here. National security risk. Absolutely. Please hurry. Emma grabbed Grace's hand, her fingers trembling. National security risk, she whispered. What does that even mean? Grace's mind raced, the phrase looping in her thoughts. It doesn't make sense, she whispered back. We're just regular high school students. Before they could process further, Dr. Peterson re-entered the room, his expression carefully neutral. Girls, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Some specialists are coming to help us understand these results. Please, stay calm. The twins barely had time to react before the office door opened again. 2 men in dark suits entered, followed by 3 medical professionals. Their faces were blank, their movements efficient but intimidating. Emma and Grace Parker, one of the men said, though it wasn't really a question. We need you to come with us for your own protection. Emma stood, her voice rising. Protection? From what? We haven't done anything wrong. Dr. Peterson's voice was pleading. Girls, please. These people can help. You need to go with them. Grace studied the men, her logical mind working overtime. We don't have a choice. Do we? She asked quietly. The silence that followed was answer enough. Clutching their belongings, the twins moved closer together, instinctively seeking comfort in each other. They were led out through a back exit, away from prying eyes, and into an unmarked van. As the vehicle pulled away, Emma looked back at the office, her artistic mind taking in every detail of the fading scene. A world they were leaving behind without understanding why. Grace, her hand tightly clasped in her sister's, kept her gaze forward, her analytical mind already preparing for whatever lay ahead. The twins were led into a stark, windowless room with white walls and fluorescent lighting that hummed softly overhead. The space was sterile, more like a hospital than anything else. But its atmosphere was oppressive. Emma clutched her sister's hand as they were seated on a small couch, the only furniture aside from a metal table and 2 chairs. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving them alone with the weight of their confusion and fear. What do you think they want with us? Emma whispered, her voice trembling. She gripped Grace's hand tighter, her artistic mind unable to stop imagining the worst. Grace sat still, her analytical mind racing through possibilities. I don't know, she admitted. But it's not good. No one calls 2 teenagers a national security risk for no reason. They barely had time to say more before the door opened again. A woman entered, tall and composed, wearing a professional suit that didn't quite hide the weariness in her eyes. She carried herself with quiet authority, her gaze steady but not unkind. She pulled a chair over and sat down across from them. I'm Detective Kate Walker, she said, her tone measured. I know this is frightening, but I want you to understand something right away. You're not in trouble. You're here because we need to protect you. Emma's brows furrowed. Protect us? From what? We don't even know what's going on. We just took a DNA test for school. Detective Walker leaned forward slightly, resting her hands on her knees. Right now, I need more information before I can explain everything. Your DNA results flagged something unusual, something that drew attention from certain agencies. I promise I'll tell you what I can as soon as I can. Why can't you tell us now? Grace pressed, her sharp mind not content with vague reassurances. What kind of anomaly are we talking about? Is it medical? Genetic? Why does it make us a risk? Walker hesitated, her expression conflicted. I don't have all the answers yet, she said carefully. But I need you to trust me while I figure this out. The twins exchanged a glance. Emma's instincts told her to believe the detective. There was a warmth in her demeanor that didn't feel like the cold detachment of the men who had brought them here. Grace, ever the skeptic, was less certain but knew they had no better options. We'll give you time, Grace said finally, her tone cautious. But we need answers soon. Walker nodded, seeming relieved by their tentative agreement. I'll make sure you have everything you need while you're here, she said. Standing. Water. Food, anything. Just let me know. As she left the room, the twins were left alone again, the silence between them thick with unspoken questions. Emma paced the small space, her fingers twisting nervously. Grace sat rigidly on the couch, her mind replaying every word Detective Walker had said, searching for clues in her tone and phrasing. She seems different, Emma said after a while, breaking the silence. Not like the others. I think we can trust her. Grace frowned, her logical nature resisting her sister's optimism. Maybe, she said. But we can't just assume everyone here has our best interests at heart. Emma stopped pacing and turned to face her sister. What choice do we have? She's the only one who's even trying to explain anything. Grace sighed, knowing her sister was right. We'll see, she said. For now, we stay calm and keep our eyes open. Meanwhile, in the hallway outside, Detective Walker leaned against the wall, her mind racing. Dr. Peterson's call had only scratched the surface of what she was uncovering. These twins, Emma and Grace, were tied to something far bigger than a simple DNA test. The encrypted files she had managed to access hinted at a classified program, one that had been terminated years ago but had clearly left its mark. A voice interrupted her thoughts. Detective Walker, a man in a lab coat, said, approaching her. He looked uneasy, his hands fidgeting with the ID badge clipped to his chest. Dr. Gupta has requested a private conversation with you. Walker's eyes narrowed. Dr. Raj Gupta, she asked, her tone sharpening. The geneticist? The man nodded. He claims to have information that could help explain everything. Walker hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Take me to him. A few minutes later, she was led to a small, dimly lit office where Dr. Gupta waited. His presence was unassuming, but there was a tension in his posture that suggested he was a man under immense pressure. He stood as she entered, his eyes shadowed with years of guilt and regret. Detective Walker, he said, his voice low but steady. Thank you for coming. I hope you have answers. Walker replied, crossing her arms. Because right now, I have 2 terrified girls in that room and a lot of questions that need resolving. Gupta's gaze flickered with something, shame. Perhaps. They shouldn't even be here, he said, sitting down heavily. They were never meant to be part of this. Part of what? Walker pressed, her voice firm. Project Genesis. Gupta said quietly. A genetic engineering program designed to create enhanced humans. Those girls, they're my legacy. And my greatest mistake. Walker stared at him, her mind reeling. You're telling me they're, what? Experiment results. Gupta nodded, his expression pained. They're far more than that. And if the wrong people find out, they'll stop at nothing to get them back. Walker's jaw tightened as the weight of his words sank in. She thought of Emma and Grace, alone in that sterile room, and knew one thing for certain: she couldn't let them fall into the hands of whoever was hunting them. She had to find a way to protect them, no matter the cost. Back in the Stark holding room, Emma and Grace huddled together on the small couch, the sterile air around them thick with tension. Grace's analytical mind was spinning, trying to piece together the fragments of information they had gleaned, while Emma clutched her sketchbook to her chest, her artistic eye scanning the room as if she could draw answers out of the walls themselves. What do you think they meant by national security risk? Emma asked, her voice a hushed whisper. I don't know, Grace replied, though her tone betrayed the fear she was trying to suppress. But if it's this serious, then whatever flagged in our DNA must be huge, bigger than we imagined. The sound of the door opening drew their attention. Detective Walker entered, her expression unreadable but her steps purposeful. She pulled a chair close to them and sat down, her eyes softening as she took in their frightened faces. I spoke with someone who might have answers, Walker began, her tone steady. Dr. Raj Gupta. He's a geneticist. And he was part of a program called Project Genesis. It was a government initiative that, she paused, choosing her words carefully, involved genetic engineering. Emma and Grace exchanged a glance. Confusion and dread mirrored in their eyes. What does that have to do with us? Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Walker hesitated before continuing. Dr. Gupta claims that both of you are connected to this program. Your DNA shows markers that were part of their research. He also suggested that the program wasn't entirely ethical. Emma's mouth fell open, her mind reeling. Are you saying we're experiments? No, Walker said firmly. You're people. But your genetic makeup is different. Enhanced. In ways we don't fully understand yet. And because of that, certain groups see you as valuable and dangerous. Grace's brow furrowed as her logical mind struggled to process this revelation. That doesn't make sense. If we're enhanced, why don't we know it? Why don't we feel different? Walker sighed. Dr. Gupta believes the enhancements were designed to be subtle, integrated into who you are. Your intelligence, your instincts, your resilience, those might be part of it. But the truth is, even he doesn't fully understand the results of the program. Emma shook her head, her voice rising. This is insane. We're just normal kids. We go to school. We do our homework. We fight over who gets the shower first. How can we be part of something like this? Walker leaned forward, her voice calm but resolute. I know this is hard to hear, but we need to face the facts. Whatever Project Genesis was, it didn't end when it was shut down. The people behind it are still out there, and they want you back. That's why you're in danger. The room fell into silence as the weight of her words settled over them. Grace's mind raced, connecting dots she didn't even know existed. While Emma clutched her sketchbook tighter, her artistic imagination struggling to make sense of a reality that felt more like fiction. After a long pause, Grace finally spoke. What about Mom? She asked, her voice trembling. Does she know about this? Walker nodded slowly. I believe she does. Dr. Gupta told me your mother was part of the program, one of the surrogates they used. But she ran, taking you with her, to protect you. Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. She's been hiding this from us our whole lives. Not to deceive you, Walker said gently. To keep you safe. Imagine what it must have been like for her, knowing what they would do if they found you. Grace wiped at her eyes, her logical mind momentarily overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment. So, what happens now? She asked. Do we just wait for them to find us? No, Walker said firmly. I won't let that happen. But I need your help. Dr. Gupta gave me information about a facility connected to Project Genesis. He believes your mother is in danger. And if we're going to protect her, and you, we need to act fast. Emma's voice wavered. You're asking us to trust him? The man who did this to us? Walker's gaze softened. I'm asking you to trust me. I don't know his full motives. But I do know this, we're running out of time. If we don't act now, we might not get another chance. The twins exchanged a look, their bond stronger than ever in the face of the chaos surrounding them. Grace's analytical mind weighed the risks, while Emma's artistic heart reminded her of the love and trust they had shared with their mother. Finally, Grace nodded. We'll do it, she said. But only if you promise to tell us everything. Walker reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Grace's shoulder. I promise, she said. But first, let's get your mother back. With that, the plan was set into motion. The twins didn't know what awaited them at the facility, but they knew one thing for certain, they would face it together. The van sped down the darkened back roads, the hum of the tires the only sound cutting through the silence. Detective Walker sat in the front passenger seat, her gaze fixed on the road ahead, her mind running through the plan again and again. In the back, Emma and Grace huddled together, their hands clasped tightly. Every bump in the road made Emma's heart skip, her artistic mind conjuring shadows where there were none. Grace, though outwardly composed, was busy mentally cataloguing every detail Walker had shared about the facility. This is it, Walker said quietly as the van pulled off the main road into a dense forested area. The headlights revealed a crumbling, abandoned industrial building hidden among the trees. But appearances were deceptive. Walker had explained that the real facility was underground, concealed beneath layers of reinforced concrete and security. "Stay close to me," she instructed as she exited the van. Her voice low but commanding. Agent Hernandez and Officer Grant, both armed and vigilant, joined them. Hernandez carried a backpack filled with the gear they would need: tools to disable locks, small surveillance drones, and medical supplies in case things went south. Emma shivered in the cool night air, and Grace gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "We'll be okay," Grace whispered, though her own heart pounded with uncertainty. "We'll find her." As they moved through the forest, the faint sound of machinery became audible, a distant hum, almost like a heartbeat. They reached the edge of the facility's perimeter, where Hernandez stopped and began setting up a drone. The small device lifted silently into the air, its cameras feeding a live view of the grounds to Walker's handheld monitor. "There," Walker said, pointing to the screen. A faintly lit side entrance was visible, with minimal security. "That's our way in." They approached the entrance cautiously, their movements quiet and deliberate. Hernandez disabled the electronic lock with practiced precision, and the heavy metal door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the air was colder, sterile, and laced with the faint scent of antiseptic. The walls were a stark gray, the corridors eerily quiet. Emma's fingers tightened around Grace's arm as they moved deeper into the facility. The faint hum of machinery grew louder, and the occasional distant echo of footsteps reminded them they were not alone. "This place feels wrong," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Grace nodded, her analytical mind struggling to keep her emotions in check. "It's not just the place," she murmured. "It's what they're doing here." Walker led the way, her hand hovering near her holstered weapon. She paused at each intersection, consulting the map Dr. Gupta had provided. "The holding cells should be just ahead," she said. Suddenly, the group froze. Footsteps echoed from around the corner, growing louder with each passing second. Walker motioned for the twins to hide behind a nearby stack of equipment while Hernandez and Grant took defensive positions. A single guard appeared, his expression shifting from casual to alarmed as he spotted them. Before he could reach for his radio, Hernandez moved swiftly, subduing him with a silent takedown. The guard slumped to the floor, unconscious. Walker gestured for the group to move forward, her expression tense. At the end of the corridor, they encountered a heavy door with a biometric scanner. Grace's eyes lit up with recognition. "This is the same kind of system I saw in the documents," she whispered. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and began examining the scanner. "Can you bypass it?" Walker asked, her voice urgent. Grace nodded, her enhanced logical abilities kicking in. "I think so. Just give me a minute." Her fingers flew over the panel, her mind working faster than the others could follow. After a tense moment, the scanner beeped, and the door unlocked. Inside, the room was filled with monitors displaying feeds from various parts of the facility. In the corner was a larger console, and on one of the screens, Emma spotted her mother. "There," she cried, pointing. Laura was seated in a stark cell, her hands bound, her head slumped forward. The sight made Emma's heart clench. "We're close," Walker said. "We need to move fast." Before they could act, a voice came from the shadows. "You're running out of time." They turned to see Dr. Gupta stepping into the light. His hands were raised in surrender, but his face was etched with urgency. The twins stiffened at the sight of him. Their biological father, the man who had been at the center of this nightmare. "I can help you," Gupta said, his voice low and steady. "But you need to trust me." Walker kept her weapon trained on him. "You'd better start talking," she said. Gupta's gaze shifted to the twins. "This isn't just about you. There are others, children who were part of the same program. They're here. And if we don't act now, they'll disappear again. You can save them." Emma and Grace exchanged a glance, their fear momentarily replaced by resolve. They didn't know if they could trust him. But they knew one thing: they had to save their mother and anyone else trapped in this nightmare. Walker nodded curtly. Lead the way. But if this is a trap, you won't get a second chance. With Gupta at the front, they moved quickly through the labyrinthine corridors, their steps growing more urgent with every second. The clock was ticking, and the stakes had never been higher. Dr. Gupta led the group down a series of dimly lit corridors, the hum of machinery growing louder with each step. The tension was palpable, every shadow feeling like a potential threat. Emma and Grace stayed close to each other, their fingers tightly entwined. Behind them, Walker, Hernandez, and Grant moved in formation, their eyes scanning for danger. Gupta paused at a junction, consulting a small, handwritten map. The holding cells are just ahead, he whispered. But security will be heavier. What exactly are we walking into? Walker demanded, her voice low but firm. Gupta hesitated. The facility is running experiments again. They're holding not just Laura, but several other children, all part of the same project. The people running this won't give them up without a fight. Emma's chest tightened. Kids? Like us? She asked, her voice barely audible. Gupta nodded. Yes. But we can end this if we reach the control room and disable their systems. It will unlock the cells and broadcast their operations to the world. Walker exchanged a glance with Hernandez, her resolve hardening. We split up, she said. Gupta and I will head to the control room. Hernandez. You. Grant. And the girls go to the holding cells. Free the captives and get them out. No, Grace said suddenly, her voice steady. I can help in the control room. I've seen the system designs in the files. I can work faster than anyone. Walker hesitated, then nodded. Fine. Emma. You stay with Hernandez and Grant. We'll meet at the exit. As they parted ways, Emma watched her sister disappear down the corridor with Walker and Gupta, her heart heavy with worry. Be careful, she whispered. Hernandez placed a reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder. We'll keep her safe. Now, let's get your mom. They moved swiftly toward the holding cells. Hernandez expertly neutralized 2 guards without a sound. And Grant kept watch, her rifle at the ready. Emma's heart pounded as they reached a heavy steel door. Hernandez tapped into the panel, and with a soft click, it swung open. Inside, Laura sat slumped against the wall of her cell, her hands bound. At the sight of her, Emma felt a surge of emotion so strong it nearly knocked her off balance. Mom, she cried, running to her. Laura's head lifted weakly, her eyes widening. Emma, she whispered, her voice hoarse. What are you doing here? We're getting you out, Emma said, tears streaming down her face as Hernandez cut the restraints. She helped her mother to her feet, her arms wrapped tightly around her. Laura clung to her, trembling. I tried to protect you, Laura murmured. I thought I could keep you safe. You did. Mom, Emma said fiercely. Now it's our turn. Meanwhile, in the control room, Grace worked with unflinching focus. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing layers of security with a speed that even Gupta marveled at. Walker kept watch at the door, her weapon ready. We're almost in, Gupta said, entering a final access code. Once the broadcast begins, they won't be able to hide this. Grace activated the system, and the screens came alive with live feeds of the facility, children in cells, rows of medical equipment, and researchers scrambling as alarms blared. She initiated the broadcast, sending the footage to every major news outlet. It's done, Grace said, her voice steady despite the chaos. They can't cover this up anymore. But before they could leave, the door burst open. Armed guards flooded the room, weapons drawn. Walker reacted instantly, firing controlled shots to hold them back. Gupta shielded Grace, pushing her toward a side exit. Go, Walker shouted. I'll hold them off. Grace hesitated, her heart hammering. But Gupta pulled her through the exit. "She'll be fine," he said. "We need to meet the others." Back at the holding cells, Hernandez and Grant guided Laura and the freed children toward the exit. Emma stayed close to her mother, her artistic mind capturing every detail of the moment, the determination in Hernandez's eyes. The fear mingled with hope on the children's faces. As they neared the rendezvous point, alarms blared louder, and the sound of boots echoed behind them. Emma turned, her breath catching as she saw more guards closing in. "Keep moving," Hernandez shouted, firing to slow their pursuers. At that moment, Grace and Gupta appeared from a side corridor, their expressions urgent. "The broadcast is live," Grace called out. "But we have to go now." The group raced through the facility, dodging guards and gunfire. Emma felt a rush of relief when she saw Walker appear ahead, her movements sharp and deliberate despite a graze on her arm. "Exit's clear," she shouted. They burst into the cool night air, the forest a welcome refuge. The van was waiting, and Hernandez ushered everyone inside, his weapon still trained on the facility. As they sped away, Emma clung to Laura, tears streaming down her face. Grace sat beside them, her hand resting on Emma's shoulder. "It's over," Grace said softly, though her voice trembled. "We did it." Laura pulled her daughters close, her voice breaking. "You saved me," she whispered. "You saved all of us." But Emma, staring out the van window at the facility disappearing into the distance, knew their fight wasn't over. The truth was out, but the scars would take longer to heal. Still, as she held her family close, she felt a spark of hope, a promise of a better future. Together, they would face whatever came next. As the sun rose over the horizon, casting its golden glow on the quiet city below, Emma, Grace, and Laura Parker sat together on their small porch, wrapped in blankets and the warmth of their reunion. The world now knew the truth about Project Genesis, and the lives of the countless children affected would never be the same. Justice was on the horizon. But for the Parkers, it was a time for healing. Laura squeezed her daughter's hands, her voice trembling with emotion. "No matter what happens next, we face it together." Emma smiled softly, her artistic mind envisioning a brighter, freer world, while Grace, ever analytical, resolved to help others with their newfound truth. Their bond, forged in love and resilience, had carried them through the darkest of times. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more powerful tales of hope, courage, and humanity.